The American West was not just won by bullets and iron. It was, more often than not, conquered by silence. A silence that, in the winter of 1884, deep within the Wyoming Territory, became deafening. For Elias Thorne, time was no longer measured in hours or days, but by the slow, agonizing rhythm of his own lungs fighting against the frozen air. The thermometer had dropped to a level where the mercury itself seemed to give up. Outside, the wind didn't just blow, it howled like a wounded pack of wolves, lashing the oak planks of his isolated cabin. Elias was alone. The expedition to Oregon had been cut short by a storm the history books would later call the Great Die-Up. His companions, some tried to seek help, and were swallowed by the absolute white in less than an hour. Others stayed behind, succumbing to the fever and the biting cold, becoming rigid mounds under coarse wool blankets. Hunger was no longer a mere pang in the stomach. It was a presence, a living creature inside his entrails, gnawing on what remained of his fat and muscle. The smell inside the cabin was a metallic mixture of ice, damp wood, and the sickly sweet scent of death emanating from the corner of the room, where his last companion, Silas, had lain motionless for 3 days. Silas was his best friend, a man he had fought alongside in the war. But in that darkness, Elias' morality was freezing along with his fingers. The ice has a cruel way of simplifying the human existence. It strips away religion, it strips away friendship, it strips away civilization. In the end, only biology remains. A single directive sent by the reptilian brain: survive. That was when the wind changed. It was no longer just the roar of the storm. It was a whisper, a voice that didn't come through the ears, but from deep within the bone marrow. A voice that suggested Silas was no longer a man, nor a friend. He was sustenance. He was heat. He was the only bridge between Elias and the following morning. Elias looked at the knife on the table, its rusted blade catching the final, dying ember of the hearth. The shadow on the wall behind him didn't look like a man anymore. It looked elongated, sharp, predatory. He didn't know it yet, but as he took that first step toward the corner of the room, the man named Elias Thorne was already dead. Something else was waking up in his place. Something ancient. Something that had been waiting in the ice for 1,000 years. Waiting for a hunger that would never, ever be satisfied. The first cut did not feel like a sin. It felt like a necessity. In the freezing void of that cabin, the concepts of heaven and hell had evaporated, leaving only the raw, pulsing urge to remain among the living. As Elias partook in the unthinkable, the air in the room seemed to grow still, as if the world itself was holding its breath, marking the exact moment. His soul was traded for a few more hours of heartbeat, but the relief was a lie. Within minutes, the warmth he expected did not come. Instead, a coldness unlike any he had ever known began to radiate from his own chest. It wasn't the frost of the Wyoming wind. It was an internal winter, a permafrost of the spirit. He looked down at his hands. The tremors had stopped, replaced by a strange, unnatural rigidity. His skin, once flushed with the fever of starvation, was now turning the color of wood ash. Then came the pain, not the dull ache of hunger, but the agonizing sound of bones stretching against sinew. Elias felt his joints pop and crack in the silence of the cabin. His spine elongated, each vertebra screaming as it forced his frame into a taller, more predatory shape. He tried to scream, but his throat felt constricted, his teeth clicking together with a new, sharp resonance. He wasn't just surviving, he was being rebuilt. He dragged himself to the small, cracked mirror above the wash basin. The man staring back was a ghost of Elias Thorne. His hair was thinning, falling out in clumps onto the floorboards. His lips had retracted, bearing teeth that seemed to have grown longer, more jagged. But it was the eyes that truly terrified him. The blue of his youth was gone, replaced by a jaundiced, predatory gold that pierced through the darkness of the room. As the last embers of the fire died out, Elias realized something that chilled him more than the transformation itself. He was no longer hungry for Silas. He was no longer hungry for bread or meat. He was hungry for everything. The blizzard outside no longer felt like a threat. It felt like a playground. The hunger hadn't been satisfied. It had simply been awakened, and it was screaming for more. The door didn't just open, it yielded. The wood groaned under the pressure of a strength that Elias Thorne had never possessed. As he stepped out into the teeth of the blizzard, the wind, which only hours ago felt like 1,000 frozen knives, now felt like a caress. He was no longer shivering. The sub-zero air felt tempered, almost warm, against his ashen, leathery skin. The transition was complete. He was no longer a guest in the wilderness. He was its new master. His senses didn't just sharpen, they exploded. He could hear the frantic heartbeat of a snowshoe hare burrowed 3 feet beneath the permafrost. A mile away, he could smell the iron in the blood of a dying horse in a distant stable. The scent as thick and sweet as honey. But it wasn't the horse he wanted. The Wendigo within demanded a more complex spirit. It craved the taste of fear, the salt of human sweat, and the warmth of a soul that still clung to hope. He began to move, not with the clumsy gait of a man, but with a fluid, terrifying grace. He loped on all fours when the trees grew thick, his claws clicking against the frozen bark, like the scuttling of a giant insect. He was a shadow within a shadow, a ghost made of hunger and hate. He followed a trail that no human eye could see, the lingering scent of wood smoke and a desperate, prayer-filled breath. Down in the valley, a lone traveler huddled over a dying flame, blissfully unaware that the wind had stopped howling for his benefit. The silence wasn't a mercy, it was a shroud. Elias, or the thing that used to be him, perched on a frozen ridge, looking down with eyes that burned like dying stars. For the first time in his existence, the hunger wasn't a pain, it was a promise that tonight, the great north would be fed. The traveler, an aging fur trapper named Thomas, felt the shift in the world before he saw it. The forest had gone entirely dead. No rustle of frozen leaves, no cry of a nocturnal owl, just the oppressive weight of a midnight that felt far too heavy. He tightened his grip on his Winchester rifle, his knuckles white, his breath escaping in short, panicked plumes of vapor. He was an experienced woodsman, but his instincts were screaming a single word: pray. Then, the silence fractured. A voice drifted through the timber. It was desperate, trembling, pleading for salvation. To a normal man, it sounded like a lost settler dying in the snow. But to Thomas, the hairs on his neck stood rigid. The voice was wrong. The cadence was mechanical. The vowels stretched a fraction of a second too long, mimicking human pain without truly understanding it. It was the ancient trap of the northern woods, the monster using the memory of the man it used to be to lure its next meal. Thomas never had the chance to chamber around. The shadows themselves seemed to detach from the trees, moving with a fluid, blinding velocity that defied the laws of nature. The canvas of the tent tore like paper under a strength born of pure malice. In a single, chaotic heartbeat, the warmth of the camp was obliterated, replaced by the suffocating stench of decayed wood and frozen blood. As the copper taste of fresh life filled Elias' throat, the human mind he once possessed died its final death. He felt no guilt, he felt no sorrow, but as he looked down at the ruined camp, a terrifying truth settled into his corrupted bones. The meal had not satisfied him. It had only amplified the fire inside his chest. The curse of the Wendigo was not just a transformation, it was a mathematical nightmare. The more he consumed, the larger he grew, and the larger he grew, the more meat he required to survive. He was a black hole in the shape of a man, doomed to hunt until the world ran out of blood. Spring eventually came to the Wyoming Territory, but the warmth never truly returned to Blackwood. When a rescue party finally reached Elias Thorne's cabin weeks later, they found no signs of a struggle. The door hung open, the fireplace was filled with gray ash, and the bones left behind in the corner were clean, splintered, and devoid of marrow. The official report stated that Elias had succumbed to the elements, his body likely dragged away by wolves. But the old trappers and the native scouts knew better. They recognized the smell that lingered in the wood, the scent of copper, ozone, and decay. As decades passed, the frontier was tamed. Telegraph wires cut through the mountains, and iron rails pierced the valleys. Yet, the legend of the Blackwood Cabin grew like a cancer in the folklore of the West. Townsfolk spoke of a shadow that traveled faster than a horse, a creature that only appeared during the whiteout blizzards, mimicking the voices of lost loved ones to coax the lonely to open their doors. Elias Thorne was no longer a name on a census registry, he had become a warning. Anthropologists would later look back at the Wendigo as a metaphor, a psychological manifestation of greed, colonial hunger, and the terror of isolation. But metaphors do not leave skeletal tracks in the snow. They do not hunt. To this day, when the temperature drops below zero and the wind wooves through the pine trees of the deep north, the old advice remains unchanged. Do not look into the dark. Do not answer the voices that call your name from the blizzard, for the hunger that consumed Elias Thorne is still out there, immortal, invisible, and forever waiting for the ledger to open again.